In late 1990, Iraq invaded and annexed its neighbor Kuwait, triggering immediate global outrage. What followed was rare. Both the United States and the Soviet Union agreed that Iraq had to withdraw or face consequences. Over the next 5 months, Iraq found itself under mounting pressure. Diplomatic isolation tightened, economic sanctions choked its economy, and a massive international military coalition began forming on its borders. Yet during all of this, Saddam Hussein and his government never made a serious move to retreat or de-escalate. That raises an obvious question: why didn't Iraq back down? To understand that, we need to go back to the situation in mid-1990. Relations between Iraq and Kuwait were already extremely strained. Iraq had just come out of a devastating war with Iran and was left heavily in debt, much of it owed to Kuwait. At the same time, global oil prices were low, putting even more pressure on Iraq's economy. Tensions escalated further when Iraq accused Kuwait of overproducing oil and effectively stealing from Iraqi oil fields through slant drilling. From Saddam's perspective, Kuwait wasn't just a financial problem. It was actively harming Iraq's recovery. On August 2nd, Saddam ordered the invasion. Iraqi forces moved quickly, and Kuwait was overrun in a matter of hours. The international response was immediate. Condemnation came from across the world. But Saddam believed he had calculated the situation carefully. He assumed the United States would lead any military response, and that the Soviet Union would block action at the UN Security Council through its veto power. But that assumption turned out to be wrong. The Soviet Union was collapsing internally and, under Mikhail Gorbachev, was focused on maintaining better relations with the West. Meanwhile, China, still politically isolated after the Tiananmen Square crackdown, had little incentive to shield Iraq and risk further international backlash. Both potential blockers of action ultimately stepped aside. Still, Saddam had reasons for confidence. He believed Iraq's recent war with Iran had strengthened his position. That conflict, brutal and long, had ended in a stalemate, but Saddam portrayed it as a kind of victory. Iraq now had a large, battle-hardened army of veterans, which he believed gave him a serious military advantage. He also saw political opportunity in the aftermath of that war. Iraq had positioned itself as a frontline opponent of revolutionary Iran, earning sympathy and support from several Arab and Sunni-majority states. Saddam believed this would translate into diplomatic cover, that regional powers would tolerate Iraq absorbing Kuwait as a reward for standing against Iran. Instead, the opposite happened. Saudi Arabia, fearing it could be next, moved quickly. It offered refuge to the Kuwaiti leadership and began pushing for international military intervention. At this point, Saddam's expected diplomatic safety net had collapsed. Neither the Soviet Union, China, nor much of the Arab world was willing to protect Iraq. But rather than retreat, Saddam shifted strategies. First, he gambled on time. His government believed that if Iraq held Kuwait long enough, international attention would fade and the crisis would lose momentum. But instead of fading, the opposite happened. A massive coalition continued to build forces in Saudi Arabia, preparing for war. Then came a new tactic: deterrence through hostages. Iraq restricted foreign nationals from leaving, hoping their home countries would avoid military action to protect their citizens. This backfired completely, further hardening international resolve. With invasion now increasingly likely, Saddam moved to the next strategy, trying to make a direct military intervention too costly. His plan was not necessarily to defeat the coalition outright, but to inflict such heavy casualties that public pressure in those countries would force them to withdraw. He looked to the Iran-Iraq war as precedent, where enormous losses had failed to break Iraqi resolve. He assumed Western coalitions would not tolerate similar levels of attrition. But the coalition responded with overwhelming air power. In January 1991, the air campaign began, targeting Iraqi infrastructure and military positions. Saddam still tried one final escalation. He launched missiles at Israel, hoping to provoke retaliation. His goal was to pull Israel into the conflict, fracture the Arab participation in the coalition, and reframe the war as a broader regional or religious struggle. That plan also failed. Israel did not respond militarily, and the coalition held together. What followed was Operation Desert Storm. Within days, Iraqi forces were overwhelmed. In just a short period, Kuwait was liberated, and coalition forces advanced into southern Iraq. The Iraqi military, weakened by sustained bombing, quickly collapsed in effectiveness. The coalition halted its advance and declared a ceasefire. In the aftermath, Saddam remained in power but was forced to accept harsh conditions. Iraq recognized Kuwait's independence, agreed to reparations, and surrendered its chemical weapons program under international supervision. And although the regime survived, the war had fundamentally changed Iraq's position in the world. and set the stage for future conflicts that would come later.